what we're looking at with this Washington Spirit side is a lot of familiarity, right? So let's just like go in and maybe do a quick team overview to catch people up on the Washington Spirit into 2022. Let's start with the head coaching situation. Washington Spirit was considered among several clubs during the offseason that was going to have a head coaching position that they needed to make a hire for. They did have interim head coach Kris Ward as part of their squad. In December of 2021, they made it official, naming Kris Ward full-time head coach. He actually took over as acting head coach in the middle of the season, late August, and then ultimately helped lead the team to an NWSL Championship, 9-2-3 record. Two of those losses ended up being COVID forfeitures, right? Procedural forfeitures that were issued to the franchise throughout their regular season. Other notable hires, I mean, I don't know if we can call it a hire, but this was something that we also kept an eye on, Lisa, during this sort of front office interfighting, a little bit between ownership. There was a little bit of a struggle that was going on there that was really, it took place over the course of several months in the latter half of the season, right? Between Washington Spirit founder Bill Lynch, Steve Baldwin, primary owner, and then minority owner Michele Kang. But now as they go into 2022, everything's in stone. Head coach Kris Ward, new majority owner Michele Kang.
I mean, so much happened in this offseason. We were constantly talking about Washington Spirit and their owners, what they were doing, how they were fighting, and what happened, and ultimately came to a conclusion, and a conclusion that the players wanted, having Michele Kang be the full owner. She has full control over this team and decision-making. And she, even towards the end of the 2021 run for Washington Spirit and at the championship, she was very involved. She was at the matches. She was with the players. She was supporting them on and off the pitch. I think that just says a lot about that. And I mean, it's so crazy to think, and I sound like a broken record, I'm sure, but the fact that this team was able to plow their way through a 2021 season, through the playoffs, go on this incredible run towards the end of the season with a new head coach, ownership fighting happening above them, and every time they stepped off the pitch, them not being aware of what even was happening until it hit social media. I remember the players talking about that. They left training one day and they saw tweets that their ownership was under discussion and under battle, and to still be able to go and win a championship. Now just imagine what they are potentially able to do without all of the extra noise in 2022, because now that the ownership debate has settled down, they have a head coach in Kris Ward that they wanted, that they have a taste of what he could bring from the end of the 2021 season. I mean, I think things are really, really looking up for Washington, and they're already standing at the top of the mountain, right? They already won the championship, but things are still looking up for them.
Yeah, that was absolutely their finish in 2021 was about as good as you can expect, right? When we look back at all of the teams and how they did in their finish, their final place in 2021, Washington Spirit look back on that and say, we went all the way to the mountain. We lifted the trophy. We are NWSL champions for the 2021 season. And because of that, with everything that they went through, right, sort of making sure it all came together in the end to sort of be that final team standing. When we did our attacking third way too early power rankings episode back in December of 2021, we gave this team first place again heading into the 2022 season. And we talked a lot about some of the things that we mentioned already, having the new pieces in place, right? And even though this episode took place during, prior to an offseason and trade window really kicking off, we knew that familiarity, right, with so many of these players in as part of the roster was going to probably give them, another road to success, but we'll see. We'll have to see if that ends up being the case. In terms of this offseason, though, with this being a team that didn't have maybe those big flashy, player acquisitions that we were seeing with all of this movement, right? They did make some roster additions and some signings, right? And that's what we're going to talk about in this windows right now. We saw them reintroduce goalkeeper Nicole Barnhart into the mix, bringing another goalkeeper into the fold, right? I think maybe sort of sent off some question marks, but I think once we get into the roster and get into the hows and the whys, we'll see why this is maybe a good addition. But they also navigated their draft event very well. They walked away with 4 2022 draft picks coming out of the NWSL draft week there. And probably, the biggest news coming out of Washington Spirit when it comes to signings, right, was probably this $1 million contract that was issued to Trinity Rodman, a 4-year deal, so equaling just over $1 million. And I got to say, it's a big number. But for me and what we saw out of Trinity Rodman, almost seems like a steal, quite frankly. What was your reaction when you saw those headlines?
I mean, it was exciting because that's the biggest contract that this league has seen, that women's soccer has really seen. And also the fact that a women's soccer contract was even making headlines is huge. I mean, there are millions of dollars of contracts that are in the news every day from the NBA and even the WNBA and NFL. But the fact that now the NWSL is in the headlines, it's definitely deserved. It comes right off the heels of a brand new CBA for the league. However, yeah, a bit of a steal. I mean, Trinity Rodman is so young. She's nowhere near her ceiling because she's just 19 years old, rookie of the year in 2021. She has so much potential, already cracking into the United States women's national team roster and getting caps and minutes there under Vlatko Andonovski. So what is it? 1.1 million, just over $1 million contract for 4 years. Yeah, a bit of a steal, but this is huge for Washington Spirit to be able to nail down a player like Trinity Rodman for the next 4 years is huge because she is so young at just 19 years old, heading into her second season in the NWSL. And under a coach like Kris Ward, who got a taste of what it's like to coach her at the end of 2021, he can really use this year to gel her and mold her into the type of player that really exposes all of her best assets. It's her speed, getting in behind. It's dribbling 1v1 defenders. It's sending those crosses into the box. She's had a number of assists last year. I mean, she wasn't Golden Boot leader. That was her teammate, but she provided so many assists in Washington Spirit squad that if she can continue to have assists throughout matches and then also score herself, this player is going to become a quadruple threat. And I think having her at the same club for an extended period of time, 4-year contract, is only going to benefit her to have a little bit of consistency and stability in her professional career at this point. But this is the biggest roster signing in the league for the year for anything in the NWSL. So it has to be the biggest for Washington Spirit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've talked a lot about certain teams on some of these previews and saying like, oh, here was the big trade that they made, right? But something within a lot of these things was the concept of, new contracts or extensions and those sort of maybe equating, right, drawing that line that this is actually a big deal as well, maybe just as big to some clubs, maybe more than like a big off-season player acquisition. It's maybe retaining the talent that you have, right? So this was huge headline breaking news for Trinity Rodman and the Washington Spirit. But when we're looking at their biggest losses, right, the most detrimental losses, I think sometimes when it comes to covering women's sports and when you get into the constructs of a salary cap and things like that, when you have a team that makes it all the way and goes and has a defining season in winning a championship, you wonder, are you able to go that next season and help like retain a lot of these players with maybe some other restrictions in place, right? So we saw in this offseason that the Spirit were kind of limited in that they were still able to sort of retain a lot of that 2021 roster, but they did have to bid farewell to Tegan McGrady when they saw her departure to San Diego Wave FC, really ahead of that double expansion draft night. And then they also recently saw the departure of Kumi Yokoyama over to Gotham FC. And they were another maybe an attacking piece, right, for this Washington Spirit side that was part of the championship side that won it all in the end. So really, two names standing out when it comes to the losses here. Who maybe rings, a little bit louder in terms of the biggest loss in your opinion, or are they both equal in terms of their departures from this club?
Both Tegan McGrady and Yokoyama had very different roles with Washington Spirit. I think maybe a player like Tegan McGrady is a bigger loss just because of where she was in her career and where she is in her career. However, I think it's honestly a bigger gain for San Diego to get Tegan McGrady than it is a loss for Washington Spirit, if that makes sense. Just because, San Diego is a team, an expansion club that's looking to develop their back line and have good defenders that can come in and learn specific tendencies that Casey Stoney is looking to provide at San Diego. And there are plenty of other defenders at Washington Spirit that can step in and slot into the back line. I mean, Tegan McGrady saw her minutes. She was kind of in and out of the starting lineup, especially towards the end of the season. I think for her personally, this is a great fresh start to go to San Diego. She's going back home to San Diego, which is huge for her. But yeah, I think that was a bigger loss. I mean, Yokoyama definitely provided that spark off the bench, and they were able to contribute to the game in the attacking presence of the word. But also, there's a lot of other attacking threats that Washington Spirit has. So frankly, I think Yokoyama, they're going to do better at Gotham than they would have at Washington Spirit. They might see more time, see different looks on the field and different positions that Scott Parkinson will throw Yokoyama in at Gotham. So honestly, yes, big losses, but for personnel and player wise, great moves for them and their individual teams and their individual interests. And Washington is going to be okay without them. I mean, they have Trinity Rodman for the next 4 years. I think they're set.
No kidding. Yeah, that attack looks just as good on paper, right, as maybe it did last year. When we're looking at, breaking down acquisitions or new signings versus biggest losses, looking to a preseason roster, right, which again, we've had a lot of fun with these on these previews because they've varied, right? But when the Washington Spirit threw out their preseason rosters, and these were preseason rosters that were coming out that first week of February, right? They came out with a massive 38 player roster for preseason. I loved it. As soon as I saw it, I was just like, of course, the reigning champions are going to have one of the biggest preseason rosters out there. But obviously with some player movement, it looks a little different. Now let's take a look at the names by position here for goalkeepers. They got a whopping 5 goalkeepers in their preseason: Aubrey Kingsbury, Devin Kerr, Sydney Schneider, Nicole Barnhart, and Sam Murphy. For the defenders, they've got 11 with Sam Staub, Kelly Herrera, Emily Sonnet, Morgan Goff, Cameron Bogowski, Alia Martin, Gabby Vincic, Karina Rodriguez, Jordan Thompson, Natalie McNally, and Amber Brooks. For the midfielders, they've listed Julia Rodar, Jordan Baguette, Andy Sullivan, Bailey Feist, Dorian Bailey, Anna Hefferty, Tori Huster, Taylor Elmer, Jaden Shaw, Andrea Furker, Emma Kirshner, Alexis Mitchell, and Eden Jacobson. And for forwards, they have listed Trinity Rodman, Avery Collins, Ashley Sanchez, Ashley Hatch, Tara McKeown, Tanaya Alexander, Lucy Shepard, and Audrey Harding. That is a ton of talent to be competing in preseason for Washington Spirit, but we hear it all the time across the league, Lisa, right? Really competitive environments are the kind of concept of, iron sharpens iron, right? So maybe a lot of competition going on right now in preseason camps.
A whopping 37 players listed on this roster. We've talked about this, that these clubs and coaches were like, yeah, we'll just throw a bunch of players on this roster and then we'll whittle down and see where we go. And frankly, for Washington Spirit, they're in the middle of their preseason where there was an international break. So they lost a lot of players over a 2-week span for international camps and then international friendly tournament. I mean, we covered She Believes Cup and Arnold Clark Cup here, but there was a number of them going on that made it a little bit thinner at training for Washington Spirit. So, hey, having 37 players, that might have helped out, but there's just a lot of players on this. I think the 5 goalkeepers is huge. Adding Nicole Barnhart onto this roster, I personally like it for Washington Spirit. She's a veteran, gold medalist. She's been to the Olympics. She's won. She's been around the block. She knows what she's doing. And I think that can provide a different veteran leadership look for this squad. But I mean, they're fighting for spots. They're not going to keep 5 goalkeepers on their
Yeah.
roster. That's just way too many. Even like 13 midfielders. Holy cow. That's just a lot of players. And frankly, when you scan this list of names on this roster, so many of them are the exact same from last year. When you look at like the starting 11, okay, maybe the starting 15 that was rotated through the starting 11 throughout the entirety of the 2021 season, their names are all here. There were no major losses that Washington Spirit suffered. I mean, I know Tori Huster suffered a tough Achilles injury at the end of the 2021 season, so she's listed SEI on this season-ending injury, which does change things, but they won the championship without her. So not a huge loss, and she's still on the roster. She'll still be there. She's still rehabbing with the team and being there in and out every single day. But I mean, a lot of names and a lot of the same names, a lot of familiar faces for Washington Spirit fans.
I think when you're looking at those familiar faces, Lisa, that's sort of who you're nabbing when you're looking at what's the ideal starting 11 for this club as they go into 2022. And you can go through that heavy, preseason roster and still see those familiar faces and say, if everything goes as planned and everyone stays healthy, you can probably nab a starting 11 based on really what we were looking at this team from last year, right? Goalkeeper Aubrey Kingsbury is probably likely to take over again, back in the pipes, as a goalkeeper. You're looking at the defensive line with Sam Staub, Kelly Herrera, and Emily Sana, etc. So there's throughout each line, you can point out all these familiar faces, including that attack, right? Which we saw this sort of chemistry starting to develop between Rodman, between Sanchez, and between Hatch as well.